Although even at 10, Jake had suspected it might not be a true fact, that it might really be a bunch of bullshit his father had turned into a fact so he could casually drop it into the conversation at lunch or over cocktails. "My kid? Oh, he's going to Piper. Best damn school in the country for a boy his age. Money won't buy you into that school, you know. For Piper, it's brains or nothing." Jake was perfectly aware that in the fierce furnace of Elmer Chambers' mind, the gross carbon of wish and opinion was often blasted into the hard diamonds which he called facts, or, in more informal circumstances, factoids. His favorite phrase, spoken often and with reverence, was, "The fact is," and he used it every chance he got. "The fact is, money doesn't get anyone into the Piper School," his father had told him during that bicentennial summer, the summer of blue skies and bunting and tall ships, a summer which seemed golden in Jake's memory, because he had not yet begun to lose his mind, and all he had to worry about was whether or not he could cut the mustard at the Piper School, which sounded like a nest for newly hatched geniuses. "The only thing that gets you into a place like Piper is what you've got up here." Elmer Chambers had reached over his desk and tapped the center of his son's forehead with a hard, nicotine-stained finger. "Get me, kid?" Jake had nodded. It wasn't necessary to talk to his father, because his father treated everyone, including his wife, the way he treated his underlings at the TV network where he was in charge of programming and an acknowledged master of the kill. All you had to do was listen, nod in the right places, and after a while he let you go. "Good," his father said, lighting one of the 80 Camel cigarettes he smoked each and every day. "We understand each other, then. You're going to have to work your buttski off, but you can cut it. They never would have sent us this if you couldn't." He picked up the letter of acceptance from the Piper School and rattled it. There was a kind of savage triumph in the gesture, as if the letter was an animal he had killed in the jungle, an animal he would now skin and eat. "So, work hard, make your grades, make your mother and me proud of you. If you end the year with an A average in your courses, there's a trip to Disney World in it for you. That's something to shoot for, right, kiddo?" Jake had made his grades, A's in everything. Until the last 3 weeks, that was. He had presumably made his mother and father proud of him, although they were around so little that it was hard to tell. Usually there was nobody around when he came home from school except for Greta Shaw, the housekeeper, and so he ended up showing his A papers to her. After that, they migrated to a dark corner of his room. Sometimes Jake looked through them and wondered if they meant anything. He wanted them to, but he had serious doubts. Jake didn't think he would be going to Disney World this summer, A average or no A average. He thought the Nut House was a much better possibility. As he walked in through the double doors of the Piper School at 8:45 on the morning of May 31st, a terrible vision came to him. He saw his father in his office at 70 Rockefeller Plaza, leaning over his desk with a camel jutting from the corner of his mouth, talking to one of his underlings as blue smoke wreathed his head. All of New York was spread out behind and below his father, its thump and hustle silenced by 2 layers of thermopane glass. "The fact is, money doesn't get anyone into Sunnyvale Sanitarium," his father was telling the underling in a tone of grim satisfaction. He reached out and tapped the underling's forehead. "The only thing that gets you into a place like that is when something big-time goes wrong up here in the attic. That's what happened to the kid. But he's working his goddamn buttski off, makes the best fucking baskets in the place, they tell me, and when they let him out, if they ever do, there's a trip in it for him, a trip to the way station," Jake muttered, then touched his forehead with a hand that wanted to tremble. The voices were coming back, the yelling, conflicting voices which were driving him mad. "You're dead, Jake. You were run over by a car and you're dead. Don't be stupid. Look, see that poster? Remember the Class 1 picnic, it says. Do you think they have class picnics in the afterlife?" "I don't know, but I know you were run over by a car." "No!" "Yes. It happened on May 9th at 8:25 a.m. You died less than a minute later." "No, no, no!" "John." He looked around, badly startled. Mr. Bissett, his French teacher, was standing there looking a little concerned. Behind him, the rest of the student body was streaming into the common room for the morning assembly. There was very little skylarking and no yelling at all. Presumably these other students, like Jake himself, had been told by their parents how lucky they were to be attending Piper, where money didn't matter, although tuition was $22,000 a year, only your brains. Presumably many of them had been promised trips this summer if their grades were good enough. Presumably the parents of the lucky trip winners would even go along in some cases. Presumably, "John, are you okay?" Mr. Bissett asked. "Sure," Jake said. "Fine. I overslept a little this morning, not awake yet, I guess." Mr. Bissett's face relaxed, and he smiled. "Happens to the best of us. Not to my dad, the master of the kiln never oversleeps." "Are you ready for your French final?" Mr. Bissett asked. "Voulez-vous faire l'examen cet après-midi?" "I think so," Jake said. In truth, he didn't know if he was ready for the exam or not. He couldn't even remember if he had studied for the French final or not. These days nothing seemed to matter much except for the voices in his head. "I want to tell you again how much I enjoyed having you this year, John. I wanted to tell your folks, too, but they missed parents' night." "They're pretty busy," Jake said. Mr. Bissett nodded. "Well, I have enjoyed you. I just wanted to say so, and that I'm looking forward to having you back for French, too, next year." "Thanks," Jake said, and wondered what Mr. Bissett would say if he added, "But I don't think I'll be taking French, too, next year, unless I can get a correspondence course delivered to my postal box at good old Sunnyvale." Joanne Franks, the school secretary, appeared in the doorway of the common room with her small silver-plated bell in her hand. At the Piper School, all bells were rung by hand. Jake supposed that if you were a parent, that was one of its charms. Memories of the little red schoolhouse and all that. He hated it himself. The sound of that little bell seemed to go right through his head. "I can't hold on much longer," he thought despairingly. "I'm sorry, but I'm losing it. I'm really, really losing it." Mr. Bissett had caught sight of Ms. Franks. He turned away, then turned back again. "Is everything all right, John? You've seemed preoccupied these last few weeks. Troubled. Is something on your mind?" Jake was almost undone by the kindness in Mr. Bissett's voice. But then he imagined how Mr. Bissett would look if he said, "Yes, something is on my mind. One hell of a nasty little factoid. I died, you see, and I went into another world, and then I died again. You're going to say that stuff like that doesn't happen, and of course you're right, and part of my mind knows you're right, but most of my mind knows that you're wrong. It did happen. I did die." If he said something like that, Mr. Bissett would be on the phone to Elmer Chambers at once. And Jake thought that Sunnyvale Sanitarium would probably look like a rest cure after all the stuff his father would have to say on the subject of kids who started having crazy notions just before finals week. Kids who did things like that couldn't be discussed over lunch or cocktails. Kids who let down the side. Jake forced himself to smile at Mr. Bissett. "I'm a little worried about exams, that's all." Mr. Bissett winked. "You'll do fine." Ms. Franks began to ring the assembly bell. Each peal stabbed into Jake's ears and then seemed to flash across his brain like a small rocket. "Come on," Mr. Bissett said. "We'll be late. Can't be late on the first day of finals week, can we?" They went in past Ms. Franks and her clashing bell. Mr. Bissett headed toward the row of seats called Faculty Choir. There were lots of cute names like that at Piper School. The auditorium was the common room. Lunch hour was outs. 7th and 8th graders were upper boys and girls, and of course the folding chairs over by the piano, which Miss Franks would soon begin to pound as mercilessly as she rang her silver bell, was Faculty Choir. All part of the tradition, Jake supposed. If you were a parent who knew your kid had outs in the common room at noon, instead of just slopping up tuna surprise in the caf, you relaxed into the assurance that everything was A-OK in the education department. He slipped into his seat at the rear of the room and let the morning's announcements wash over him. The terror ran endlessly on in his mind, making him feel like a rat trapped on an exercise wheel. And when he tried to look ahead to some better, brighter time, he could see only darkness. The ship was his sanity, and it was sinking. Mr. Harley, the headmaster, approached the podium and imparted a brief exordium about the importance of finals week and how the grades they received would constitute another step upon the great road of life. He told them that the school was depending on them. He was depending on them, and their parents were depending on them.